Hi guys, great to have you here with me today. My name is Phil Davis. I'm the CEO at Flyform. I'm joined today by these three gentlemen to talk about ServicePath and ServiceNow, and also some of the processes around that, like CPQ and quote to cash. So with me, I have Marcus Redfern. Marcus, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so I'm a ServiceNow specialist. I'm focused on delivering customer projects and helping them deliver efficiencies within the ServiceNow product.
Brilliant, thanks Marcus. And then I have Mike from ServicePath. Mike, who's going to go next?
Hi everybody. Yeah. Hi everyone, Mike Molson. I'm one of the co-founders of ServicePath, and I spend the bulk of my time helping our clients make the best use of our system to play a key role in automating their quote to cash, quote to provisioning process.
Brilliant, thanks Mike. And last but not least, Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Daniel Kube, CEO of ServicePath. And as everyone mentioned, we see a real convergence of CPQ and quote to cash and enablement as part of these new programs around digital transformation. When we see an amazing mapping with our stack and solution set with the ServiceNow ecosystem, just based on the number of our customers that actually have their implementation. And a couple of things that really excite us is this ability to do integration is now easier than ever. The agility that everyone wants now coming into reality. So looking forward to the discussion.
Brilliant, great. Well, thanks for joining us today. So so first of all, then obviously we know, we're a big ServiceNow advocates in Flyform. We're an elite ServiceNow partner. We've been playing in this ecosystem for some time. And one of the things that kept happening with one of the verticals we play in a lot, which is kind of the tech MSP space, was we kept hearing about this product ServicePath. And at the same time we kept hearing about that product, we also kept seeing some complex messes within their own environment that they'd either create themselves or bought somewhere else or stitched together, or a combination of these things. So hence how we end up getting introduced and coming here today. So do you want to just tell us, I know you just touched on it briefly, but a little bit about ServicePath, what the product does and what challenge it's going to solve, and what the opportunities are there?
Sure. I'll start and then Mike can chime in. He's much deeper technically than me. So quote to cash has been around for a long time. We play in a space called CPQ, which is configure price quote. One of the reasons why this is a really interesting time for us with COVID, there's been a real resurgence or focus on digital transformation just because of the number of people that have gone to go working remote. So now organizations have been really challenged to pull all their systems together to create enablement to make these processes really, really easy. So if you look at sort of our foundational elements and the things we talk about that are really important for a successful CPQ enablement, it's talking about ease of use, the need for it to be codeless and really agile. And those themes are really important because for any system to succeed, those elements have to help be enabled, because otherwise the program falls into misuse and just gets delayed and never actually comes to fruition. Those same requirements, because everyone's now being remote, everyone wants to pull their systems together. So we see this great convergence of those needs and other integrations. And as mentioned earlier, the ServiceNow vision, to actually go from once you actually have the organization enabled on a platform to help support the engagement, the provisioning, the ticketing and support of that, the ability to pull these systems together is now easier than ever. And that's what gets us really excited about the combined vision. And we've been pulled by our customers saying, hey, it's great that you can do this on the front end and help bring a quote to life and help get an order. But now we would like to take that order and bring it to life in our organization automatically from a self-service perspective. And just based on the verticals that we focus on that are generally really high tech, quite a bit of, I'd say, complexity, there's a lot of mapping with our customer base, I'd say, in excess of 90% where ServiceNow exists as well. So, the whole vision of us working with Flyform is to pull these two worlds together and also fundamentally reinforce, our core vision of ease of use and bringing these systems to life. I mean, Mike, I pass it to you.
Yeah, awesome. We started this business 10 years ago. Well, I guess 11 years ago now. We used to operate in leadership roles in the service provider, MSP, outsourcing world. And we had spent considerable amount of effort and cost to drive automation through the sales motion. And what we found was with the bigger vendors, they lacked agility. with the smaller vendors, they were only focused on one specific revenue stream. And we said, well, in the MSP world, there's all these different revenue models, pricing approaches and methodologies, different ways at which sales has successful outcomes. We said, well, why don't we build a software as a service platform that really drives sales enablement, with a couple of key differences. Daniel mentioned codeless. So, really enabling business users to make changes, reducing the dependency on technical or developer resources. Number two, be completely agnostic to revenue type. So it doesn't matter what the revenue is now or in the future through, a pending acquisition. You need a centralized place to maintain all of those products that you're going to price through that CPQ journey. And then three, be very kind of open, but be very focused on, for us, for specific areas. Number one, understand cost of serve. What are the unit economics for my business? Really important for pricing. Number two, which is the CPQ, configure, price, quote. But that's only part of what we do. Number three is solution-based selling. Sometimes we use the term interchangeably, guided configuration, guided selling. How do we enable more people from the sales organization to sell more complexity with the least amount of effort, with the highest degree of confidence to get a quote in the hands of the end customer? And number four, which I'm sure is going to come up in our conversation today, is how do you manage the constant change that's happening? Whether or not it's change on products, change on operating model, change on for the end customer around renewals, so on and so forth. Notably, as the world is moving more and more to a subscription economy, they're moving away from the old project-based approach to, I'm going to buy a subscription and pay for it over, this monthly fee over the next 36 months. And so we built a platform that's very focused on technology providers. We understand that domain really well. And that's why we're really excited about the Flyform partnership, and notably ServiceNow, right? We all have a common understanding of the service provider world. We understand the business model. There's really good alignment around our domain expertise to make a real difference to our end clients.
That's awesome. Thanks very much, guys, and thanks for the overview. I'm sure it'll be helpful for a lot of people. And even like my background's heavily in tech MSP myself, but I never really. I was very operations and delivery focused, so I didn't see too much over that in that fence in the CPQ side. I was more worrying about how we were going to build what had already been sold, or how we were going to support that stuff in the live teams afterwards. So it was an interesting look over the fence for me to see this. So thanks for that, Mike and Danny. So you talked about a number of things there, like the guided selling and enabling this complex things to be sold easily, and also this changing world. What are you seeing today as the biggest challenges they're facing now? I'm going to guess some of them on the reverse of what you said. So I'm guessing today we're seeing people kind of with this constant change, not be able to keep up, I guess, pricing sheets out of sync and pricing guides out of sync with reality. I guess they're selling things I just said maybe that I used to receive, which is things that don't really make sense when they come over the fence, either from a cost or architecture perspective. So is that the kind of stuff that you're seeing a lot of in the client base today?
Yeah, I'm dating myself a bit, but there are some parallels to, if anyone can remember what a green screen was. Yeah. And with everyone becoming remote, everyone now has the expectation it should be as easy to Google something, right? So the expectation for your applications to behave in that easy to use manner. The problem is there's a lot of, to your point, intersections that are making that not so easy, especially when you have an organization that sells many things that have many inputs. So that whole point of keeping up with the velocity of change and the ability to have the agility to transform, to embrace that, has been really problematic, especially in digital transformation, because it's much harder to convene people around a boardroom now, and get that real one-to-one feeling because it's all virtual. But by the same token, it's a great opportunity because technology has really enabled a lot of these changes to begin to happen, right? So enterprise application, or EAI, has been existing since like the 80s, but now with the ease of use, with the a lot of the solutions available, it's really becoming a reality. And that's what our customers are seeing. They're saying, look, we've solved so well for this front part of our office. Now, how do we take that quote and actually bring it to life from an automatic provision? As soon as that person says accept, Phil, in your old world, you would go look at that, bill of materials and say, okay, let's put this rack here. Let's turn these switches on. Now the expectation is saying, hey, that needs to be automated. And also the customer saying, okay, well, now that I've bought that, I would love to be able to come back into that system and tune it myself without having to talk to a salesperson. Like, that's the vision that people are pushing us towards. So that digital transformation combined with this rate of change is really exciting for us. The harsh reality, though, is a lot of people, especially organizations that have been around more than 10 years, are saying, well, our systems are kind of brittle and it's really hard to do that. So, how do we move from this brittle IT infrastructure to one that enables that, right? So that's where we're getting pulled into discussions. And I think one of our calls to action at the end is, to help organizations understand we can maybe point you in the right direction to get you started, which would be very interesting. Mike, I'm sure you have more to add.
Yeah, I'll go maybe one level deeper. If we look at businesses have kind of stepped back and they're saying, where do I sit on the maturity curve in terms of my business? At the left hand of the spectrum, I'm number one. I'm very much an ad hoc business. I deal with things as they come in. My systems are probably immature. I've probably got a CRM in place, but billing's going to be manual and spreadsheets are pervasive throughout the business. But as you move up, every business wants to mature and grow. So as I move from an ad hoc to maybe a repeatable business, right? I'm starting to be more system driven, data is more centralized. But what we're seeing now is businesses want to get to level 3, level 4, which is, how do I have a managed business where I'm not just looking at the CRM on the front end, as Daniel mentioned, but I've got to take care of my customers. It's not projects that I'm doing. So I need a tool like ServiceNow that's going to help drive automation in the service management layer. But we also see another area around the digital transformation, which is the billing side, where it might have been crude, it might have been very manual. I need to kind of rethink that because there's unpredictability for my end customer. And as we all know, customers hate unpredictability. The second thing that we see is how pervasive spreadsheets are within an enterprise. The spreadsheet is the glue to the business when the systems don't work right. So you may have spent a ton of money on CRM system and kind of a crude ticketing system, but you're constantly using spreadsheets to pull information out, kind of reconstitute it and send it back to the customer. That knowledge gets lost. It's open for errors to be made. And that applies to, the products that I sell. How are they priced? The quotes that I generate. And importantly, when we get into downstream delivery, what actually is it that we sold? So there's this desire within our customers to say, how do I mature and how do I remove that spreadsheet out of that world? And if I take that one a little bit further, some of the pain points that we constantly see, again, mainly on the CPQ side, is number one, what's going through my business in terms of revenue, and is that good revenue? I don't know. If it's going through spreadsheets and through people's emails and it's not systematic, I genuinely, if I'm a leader in that business, I don't know. And that's a common point that we hear from our customers is, can you give me visibility into what's happening within my business? The next one is around, how do I make sure that I'm driving a level of standardization without not at the expense of creativity, right? I still want to be flexible. I still want to be able to design solutions for my end customer, but you need to have a level of standardization in place. And our approach, what we think is really unique, is make it modular. Make sure you've got all the right building blocks in place that you can combine them together to get a solution out to the customer, so that when we get into delivery, when we get into service management, service delivery, that the customer is going to be delighted, because what you just sold me is what I'm going to deliver at the end of the day.
Yeah, and then one of the interesting things that still amazes me is, we have a myriad of different customers all over the financial spectrum, from 100 million in turnover to multiple billions to 20 plus billion to even larger 100 plus billion organizations. And the pervasiveness of the spreadsheet exists in every one of the very large customers, significantly everywhere. Some of our smaller customers have actually had the ability to jump a generation and be more modern. So they are agile now, and they actually have some advantage because of that. And you can see their growth rates are reflecting that, because they can invest calories in growing versus just maintenance and care and feeding. So, I mean, that's why everyone's trying to get there, just because of the legacy or the technical debt that that they've acquired. And that's another sort of commonality with our customers, is most of our customers are serial acquirers, right? So they've become to process or productize their ability to onboard and synthesize these organizations together, that has now become a differentiator and competitive advantage for them. Whereas, some organizations have basically, they acquire, but they don't have a great integration strategy to pull these assets and to create the synergy from the acquisition quickly. That's a real commonality, and this all ties to all the themes we're talking about today.
I think that's a really interesting point around that onboarding and acquiring. When we speak to our MSP or tech clients or prospects, we see that same pattern actually, and I think it's because obviously as well, these days tech is a very hot space in terms of private equity and venture capital. So a lot of these companies are backed. Obviously, they're acquisitive, and we quite often help advise them from a ServiceNow perspective on the other side of that tooling in terms of their ITSM processes or their HR and their other pieces that ServiceNow supports. Creating a framework within ServiceNow to allow them to ingest those businesses into a framework, whether that's through ServiceNow's domain separated architecture or CSM, whichever kind of fits their business. We see and sell that message a lot. So I'm really interested to hear. So how does that look and feel for your product? Do you try to keep this as the central hub so that when they're ingesting these new businesses, they kind of get onboarded to ServicePath and become part of that playbook? Is that how that kind of plays out?
Yeah, we try to be the end system, the system of record for some specific data. Number one is the product information. Again, it's part of the initial introduction, being completely agnostic to revenue. So as that acquisition comes in, how do I make sure that product information is all centralized in one repository? So then number two, how do we have a unified selling motion? So as I bring on a new sales team, I've got sales team 1, sales team 2. I want to drive cross-sell across both of those new customer estates. And I've got products across both of them. How do I get them working together? And we've got, much like you said, we've got a blueprint on how we help organizations go through that. And then the third one, which is making sure that post-acquisition, there's always bumps in the road, right? As I'm merging two businesses together, there's maybe some not great governance. So we help cover that off in our system, that every quote needs to be looked at, whether or not it's technically or financially, so that we're protecting this new brand post-acquisition, that every deal that comes out of the platform is always going to be consistent. It's sellable, deliverable, winnable, which is the 3 points that we often talk about with our clients.
One of the things I see quite often with the customers is that spreadsheet culture you talk about results in the sales team having one product model, but that not quite matching up with the project delivery model, and then the support models falling through right through to the billing model as well. It's an area that ServiceNow has been focusing on recently around their common service data model, and combining that with a CSM product they have. It can provide that glue that holds all those things together, and that consistent framework that allows products like ServicePath to plug in on top of, and to produce the product models and the allowed sales options that you can develop. But also that flows through into the delivery and into the support side. And it really gives that consistency of installed product with different customers that, as they call the service desk, they can see what's installed. They can sell the next element of it. Or when you come to renewals, it seems a common area where in some of the homegrown solutions and Excel spreadsheet-based solutions, you almost have to start again as another annual project to pull it all together. And that's really not supporting their digital transformations. They want to move to that more subscription-based model. And that's really where I see the kind of benefits of ServicePath combined with the ServiceNow model, giving that slick end-to-end and joined up framework that everything sits on top of.
Yeah, I totally agree, Marcus. I mean, what we're what we're doing right now is building that blueprint, right? But how do we help a user of Service Path and ideally ServiceNow draw a through line from the customer, the opportunity, the quote, the order, all the commercial information like the contract framework, through down to entitlement, into support, customer service management. So everyone has a common view on what it is that that customer has committed to. We just tend to take the view of commercially, what does it look like? How do we marry that up with ServiceNow, which is the technical definition of what's being delivered, and we see a real kind of marriage between those two areas.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and going to the other point earlier on the automated provisioning and those kind of things, these days, customers do expect to be able to go in and click and deploy something new, whether that's virtual machines or Dockers or storage or whatever it is that they're buying. And we've seen some evolution in that, I think. But as you said, I think ironically the newer, smaller companies have been able to jump a couple of levels because they've come in later to the game, and also they're agile and small enough to make those changes quickly, where it ironically does tend to seem to be the mid-size kind of MSP space, tech space, which have been backed and acquired, because I think it leads into that complexity that they've also had a lot of organic complexity. Going back to the old days without standardized sales models, every client's got different SLAs, every client's got, there's no standard products or setup in the environments. It's literally environments with clients where there's 500 clients and there's 5,000 SLAs, and no one's got the same environment. And then they acquire on top and bolt these things in, and then you bring in all the political and cultural and the pricing differences as well. And it's bound to end up in this mess, kind of where some of them are now, I guess. So I think it's a really big opportunity for people, to be able to also as well take that kind of blank sheet and say, okay, well, we are where we are now. We know where we've got to get to, which is this world of, as you said, the quickest, most smoothest, frictionless process from a conversation to something being in the environment, isn't it? And then eventually no conversation, the customers are coming on and tweaking. And this is a way for them to clean that slate and say, okay, well, that's the old world, this is the new world. How do we get there? How are we going to build all this in? And this tool is going to help them do that. So yes, definitely a big and interesting one.
I've got a question on that, Phil. There's one thing I wanted to talk about today. What do you see happening around end customer self-service? Do you see a trend happening? Is there any patterns that you're seeing in the market?
I think there's definitely still a trend towards self-service. I think it's been a lot slower than I've anticipated personally, outside of any of the key vendors. As we know, you can go to AWS these days and Azure and spin things up, but that's only kind of a tiny piece of the puzzle. I go back to, I think probably 2014 maybe, and I was working in a mid-sized MSP tech that got acquired by a global one now actually. And back then things could get so bad sometimes where a customer would order a VM and it would be through the portal. So we had a portal, so the kind of right ideas were there, but the portal, they'd order on the portal, and but then it would generate an email to someone. So some of these got lost. So 6 months later, a customer's still saying, "Can I have my machine, please?" And in the end, it became a bit of a, we had a new leadership team came in, and it was like, "Well, we can't. This is ridiculous." And I think at that point they got it down to about 2 to 4 weeks for a VM to be stood up. And the mission as we were given was basically, if a customer requests a VM, it needs to be up within 48 hours, full stop. And back then that was still fairly reasonable, but that still entailed, someone requests on the portal, it triggered this kind of task, and we were using ServiceNow actually at the time, and it would trigger the task to the build team. So we cut out email, we cut out the mess, and we kind of put it into tasks, and we brought in notifications and dashboards and alerts to really at least try and get this 48-hour thing, But even back then, we were talking about things like in ServiceNow where we have, cloud management and other things like that, where it can spin up these VMs automatically. And I think customers definitely, the end customers want that. And I think the MSPs themselves want to be able to provide it. But I think in a lot of cases, it's probably this stuff that holds them back from doing that, because they don't have the standardized catalog to some degree and the standardized pricing model and so on. When they come to look at that project, they're like, well, they end up maybe piloting it with a few of their key the top clients who've got the standard books and stuff, because they get, okay, we can give it to those three easily. But when they've got 100, 500, 1,000 clients with all different price books and different products, they look at the size of the investment of time and money to get that in place, and they struggle to justify it to maybe to themselves or to their board or whatever. But I think where we see it now, the tide turning, is that people aren't willing to make that investment for whatever reason and do that. They're going to become the did runs, they're the guys that kind of ran as well, because customers are, as we talk about in all parts of tech these days, is we expect a consumer grade experience in the enterprise now, whether that is live chat, virtual agent, or whatever the tech may be. But we don't expect to go in and clunk around on forms and have phone calls and then 10 different emails and a wet signature and wait 2 weeks for something. So I think, and I think that's finally now forced to the point where if you can't provide an experience that's kind of at least close to that consumer grade, or however you want to define it, then eventually your customers are just going to drop off, because the perception of that is that you either can't do it or you're not good enough to do it. And if you're supposed to be the tech MSP provider, you should be surely the best at providing that slick cutting edge feel. And I think that's really pushed it. So I think customer sentiment is there on the end customer, and I think the desire is there in the teams and MSPs. And I think we're seeing now that tide turning where some of them are going for it and they're really going for it. They're putting money behind it, the board are behind it. They're like, let's make this big change, or they're still struggling and fighting. And I think those customers a lot of the time for me they're also the ones that don't invest enough in ServiceNow, because ServiceNow, for the customers it really works for, they're either very, very simple organizations and they don't need to get into a complex thing with ServiceNow, or they do need to invest to get the best out of it, and they don't. They want to kind of do pieces and bits, and where we see the people getting the most value are the ones that really say, okay, this is going to be a strategic platform at the center of the business. So wherever we can, we'll use ServiceNow. We won't go outside where we can't. And if we do use ServiceNow, like with you guys, is there an app available? Is there a specialist that we can bolt still into ServiceNow and keep it as that orchestrator? Where they really make that strategic decision up front and then say, we're going to invest on a long term for this tool. There'll be an annual budget to the development and the consultancy and everything else. That value becomes exponential. And I think those are the same customers then that see tools like ServicePath and other tools that this is a great investment and we're going to keep maintaining this product, because ServicePath, I imagine, like a CMDB, is only as good as the data that's in it on a given day. So unless someone puts the underlying processes in to maintain the ServicePath data and keep the product book and price book updated, it becomes out of date and becomes out of fashion again. People just go back to manual, don't they? It's kind of the equivalent of techies. If the CMDB is bad, they go back to the diagrams they've got handwritten or stored somewhere. So I just think those customers that are really up for that strategic investment, keeping their eyes on the prize, they're the ones that tend to really crush it, both through ServiceNow and bringing products like yours in. And I think they're the ones that we do see bigger growth rates on their revenue, bigger customer satisfaction scores. And obviously, as we know, that just compounds and leads to kind of winners in the end.
Yeah, interesting. We've seen, there's kind of three things that we've seen, Phil, to build on that commodification and that expectation that if I can buy it as a consumer, I should be able to buy it as an enterprise, because enterprise was always ahead of consumer services in the past. And so that's changed the bar, and the hyperscale have definitely impacted, the MSPs. We see this intermediary step right now around customer self-service. I think everyone wants a customer to self-serve, right? Reduce cost of acquisition. They're in control, all the benefits that you kind of see from that. But we see this intermediary step, especially when we're in delivery mode. And we sort of termed it as everyone sells, delivery included. That why haven't organizations thought about exposing the ability to do a quick quote for an end customer? You've asked for this. By the way, let me upsell you this extra service XYZ, because the tools have never been exposed to them. And we're seeing this with a handful of our clients now saying, why don't we do that? Why don't we get our customer service desk, helping drive some upsells into our customers, expose access to the CPQ tool, get them into the sales motion so the data is always consistent and accurate. But now we've completely short-circuited the time to respond to a customer, where it used to be customer service would take down an email, send it off to the account manager would call the customer would say, no, that's not quite what I asked. Why don't we just have the CSM directly engage with the end customer and try to solve it for them right then, even if it's a commercial change.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, it has been a funny tide that's turned with consumer and enterprise, with enterprise used to be ahead. And the funny thing is for me that it's the enterprises that are providing the consumer experience to the consumers. So in a lot of cases, it's the same orgs. But it was really interesting what you just said about that whole kind of upsell thing, because I don't know if you guys, aware of the term, but a click funnel. Do you know what click funnels are? So a lot of entrepreneurs, like solopreneurs, they use these click funnels to sell so if you ever go onto a site to buy like supplements or an ebook, and you kind of pick the book and you press next, and then it says, hey, by the way, today you're buying this one ebook, but you can buy two and get this free extra thing. And a lot of those deals, they do lose, I get sucked into some of those deals. And they really, they're built for that. And it's a really interesting concept to bring that kind of, that click funnel-y kind of experience, if you like, into the enterprise, where if you buy in, for example, a new environment for something, by the way, you've said this environment's going to be critical for you. Do you want to put this on the platinum SLA instead of the gold SLA that you normally have? It's
exactly.
And it's a fantastic concept. Yeah, I really like that idea. Great. Marcus, what other kind of challenges and pain have you been seeing? You've been really on the coal face with a few of our MSP clients, and I know you've come back to me with some stories about some of the stuff you've seen, maybe custom built and this kind of stuff. What kind of things are you seeing out there in the world?
I think it's really around that where people have gone off and customized ServiceNow to develop their own CPQ tools to try and move away from those spreadsheets. The thought process you have to go through to allow reworking of those quotes without starting again just hasn't been put into the customized tools. So the basics have been done pretty well, but as soon as you kind of go off the critical path and want to actually loop back around and take something out or put something in, I've seen some customers who are doing a network order which has got 50 sites. Inevitably, over a 3-month period, some of those sites will come and go because just the business churns there. And if you can't adjust that order mid-flight, but you have to go back to the beginning every time, I've seen some admin teams spending 20 or 30% of their time just rebuilding orders and starting again. And the return on investment for reducing that rebuild, reducing that rework, the reduced impact on customers who have to reauthorize things they might have mostly authorized already, is really where the payback is for investing in doing it in a much more joined up way. And the same thing really goes for the kind of the transition from sales to project and then on into support. And then when people when clients ring the service desk and say, so-and-so bit of equipment is broken, because the models and the product sets don't quite match in all the different databases that everybody's using through that chain, then actually the service desk are kind of running around in the background trying to find whether they are actually in support or whether they, what other products might be impacted by that failure. And so the whole end-to-end kind of user experience through the sales cycle, but also through into support and the renewals, is really heavily impacted by that kind of disparate, similar but very not quite the same data model. And because it doesn't quite join up, it's close enough, but it doesn't quite join up. It actually becomes very hard when you get when I used to sit on the operational side of and receive business from MSPs. If I got a bill that was 200 pages long, and I was trying to look through that every month to find things and check on sites that had been closed down, other sites that had been added, that just ate up my resource in my team on the customer side to try and process that bill every month. If you had reassurance that the model was correct and there was accurate information at all stages, then when you came to either uplift a site midway through a contract or remove a site from the contract, you had that reassurance that the billing was accurate because it linked and was easy to trace back to what the quote was. Then the reduction in kind of overhead of your just resource processing that bill was massive. I've seen so many examples of, the order comes through in one format with one set of product description, and you go through to the bill and it's got a completely different set of product description that you just can't interpret the two things together, especially if you're in the finance team and you're not that technical anyway. So the finance team then end up going to the operational support team to ask the techies, is this bill right? And the impact it's having all over the organization and the resistance to then making changes in your contract and doing those uplifts is a really significant factor in just that lack of consistency through the whole model. So if you can get that right, not only does it give something that the quote and the configuration tools can kind of get a solid foundation and solid product model, but if you can move that across into the support and the billing platform and then present them in a consistent way with consistent hierarchies or product groups, then those bills become easy to kind of marry up between what you bought on your order and your purchase order, but also then what you're supporting day to day. And when you come to renew it at the end of your contract, it becomes quite straightforward to add and remove bits and pieces to it as well. If it's hundreds of lines or even hundreds of pages with 1 or 2 lines on each page, you're kind of faced there looking at this kind of big stack of paper that you've had to print out with your highlighter pen to kind of go through, and it's just almost impossible to process, and you just don't want to do it really. So that's where I really see the benefit from the customer side of getting this right, is that you make their life so much easier that they don't want to leave you and go to one of your competitors.
Nice. Yeah, it's a painful experience. And I think even the fact that, building out themselves, if there's a best of breed tool out there they can use, they're spending hundreds of thousands on development, for essentially something that was potentially unsupported in terms of when the platform upgrades in the future. It's another overhead. It's another admin and technical debt overhead for them. And also, you've got, hence why you guys are in business, we've got all these companies doing the same thing essentially, and all trying to reinvent that wheel themselves around these processes themselves. It's a really inefficient way to run it. So it's
I think that's really a key point, because our customers sort of, you mentioned product, but our customers really have begun to really move to solution. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? Because a lot of their markets have been commoditized with hyperscale, especially in the tech world, right? So our customers regularly create solutions that leverage hyperscale or VM inputs as just one component of a much larger solution. Those solutions sometimes are very digestible by the customer to say, hey, it's this many VMs. These are the different products that you can configure and change, Mr. Customer. But in a lot of our organizations, they hide that and it's one solution set, but there's many inputs behind it. And that's one of the things they love about ServicePath, because it's very quick to assemble these different solutions, hide them, understand your profitability, understand the technical architecture if it works. But, and that complexity for the customer can be hidden to make it really digestible. But certain customers want to be able to digest those inputs and tune them, to your point. But that's one of the things that we've seen a big evolution on, is that whole point of moving from just a widget A to, the solution may have 50 widgets across 40 locations and 40 different tuning levers in the quoting process. And that previously was really, really hard to do, right? So one of the things that we absolutely believe in is that configuration and that ease of use is really important for the salesperson to go through that question model to be able to configure a solution for a customer where before they would require an SE or a sales engineer to support that voyage. So now we make it really fast to get those quotes out that are really complex in nature, but have been pre-built and pre-vetted both financially and technically. And I mean, I think in some ways that is still a challenge with digital transformation, because some of these inputs are what I would call soft. They're not technical, like a technical solution or something that you provision. It's a couple of hours from a PS manager or So when the customer says, I want to change that solution, there's many inputs. And just to give you an order of magnitude, we have customers doing very simple quotes, one are actually just buying racks, things or boxes or PCs. But then we have customers who are actually building quotes with 100,000 line items with configuration capabilities within one single quote. So it's a massive spectrum, which is very interesting that we've seen. Like I know you put there.
Yeah, just to add on to that, that whole goal, and just bring it back to Marcus, what you were saying as well, that consistency across all the different systems, you've got to have the underlying data there. But one thing that we've really focused on is how do we present that data in different data planes, right? So if I'm leadership, I really just care about the MRR, the total contract value, break even, NPV, and payback, right? Like that's what I care about at that high level. So in our platform, you kind of look at that, and at a glance, I can see the health of that deal. If I'm in finance, though, I want to look, where have we amortized, right? How have I categorized this revenue? what's this going to look like in the ERP or the finance system? You click a different button, you look at the data in a different way, but I've got everything that I need. It's still the same quote, it's still the same order. And then for the delivery teams, they want to understand context and relationship, right? So this managed service sits on top of this device, which is going to be connected to this, right? So it allows them to infer, well, what actually do I need to go and deliver? And I need to consume that data in the way that's going to make my life easier from a delivery perspective. So we've really kind of spent a lot of time to make sure that those three personas, obviously the salesperson, but then delivery, leadership, and finance, we've accounted for those. Same data, just a different view of what that data is.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's essential, as you say, and those are three completely different views as well, aren't they? And they're all needed. And I guess that's exactly that scenario you just mentioned, where people end up with 200 sheets of paper because it's just giving you everything. Just take all this stuff and go figure out what you want from it, and that doesn't serve anyone. And I can't imagine the scale of that problem, because we're a small business. There's probably about 75 people in Flyform, and I've already been through the pain of trying to make sure that we're pricing the same way and billing from it and all these other bits and pieces. And we've been fortunate, as you guys alluded to, that because we're a small and agile business, we've quickly been able to pivot into some new systems and tools and mature very quickly. Where I actually sympathize with these companies, because I can see, having done a small piece of it firsthand, that if you don't fix that problem early and then you get some momentum, that's a much bigger problem a few years down the line. So I feel their pain. So just lastly, guys, what kind of, how do you see the implementation, or maybe, as you talk about, potentially this is a transformation for some businesses, right? Some people are maybe quite in a sticky spot with some of this stuff, and they need to really mature it fast. Are there any kind of tips or advice you give to people who are about to embark on this journey that they maybe need to do in advance, or things they need to think about and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, and Mike has tons of experience doing this, is it's not big bang, right? You have to start at small chunks and build from there. But it's great to have a great vision, but build that vision slowly, and pick a starting point. Rome wasn't created in a day, and we've seen so many. One of the things we advertise on our website is the vision of this concept of failed CPQ, because most of our customers have tried this before and have failed massively, because they've tried to do this big bang solution, pull all these different systems together, and didn't really understand also the care and feeding that a system and program needs. Right, that's one of the big reasons why programs fail, is that you get the great initiative and momentum at the beginning, and then they say, oh, we're done. There's no concept of done when you have a SaaS implementation and your business model changes on a quarterly basis. It needs constant care and feeding and support, right? So you need to envision that at the very beginning and say, what chunk are we going to start with? In our world, a lot of organizations say pricing is so imperative. Our responsiveness needs to be there. We need to be able to beat our competitors and get a quote out faster. So that's a logical place. But now, for example, a lot of our customers have already done that with us. They're saying, okay, what's the next evolution of our quote to cash process service path? How can you help us get to this provisioning and enablement and ticketing, like the work we're talking about with our shared customers? So, start somewhere, but don't go big bang.
Yeah.
Mike?
Yeah, I'd agree from a ServiceNow perspective, having that support, ongoing support in place, keeping the governance of the foundational data going. I think it's key to take on some of the quite tricky to negotiate service levels. You mentioned having several hundred or thousands different service levels in the same organization. At some point, you've got to grasp that nettle and try and reduce it down to a more consistent, manageable approach. And there's no easy way of doing that, I don't think. But it's really, if you've done that, or once you've done that, rather, it really drives that ability to be agile going forward. And like you say, you can't do everything all at once, but if you start with different bits, different areas, product lines, SLAs, getting that consistent buy-in for at least all your customers going forward, having a smaller set of SLAs, then that really helps you on that journey.
Yeah, I'll add 4 quick bullet points for me. Number 1 is it starts from the top. You've got to have the right leadership in place that's bought into this journey that you're on. With that, you're going to shift back and forth. You're never going to achieve the outcome that you want to do. Number 2, as Daniel, you and Marcus both mentioned, which is the transformation has to have a roadmap. Big bang is, we believe it's just a recipe for failure. So define a roadmap of different milestones that you want to get to over an agreed period of time. Hit those milestones. When you hit them, the sense of reward is so important for the team. You move on to the next one, right? Smaller bite-sized things that you can deliver, execute on, and feel a sense of success, really. Number 3, don't forget the importance to standardize as you embark on that journey, because without a drive, whether or not it's process or data, products, you are going to hit some roadblocks as you're on. And then the last one, not to be taken as a plug, but we've seen this with our clients where they've engaged with technology partners that have a failed implementation, where they picked a platform that didn't understand the MSP, the service provider world. And that is a recipe for disaster. You're not in retail, you're not in manufacturing, you're not in insurance, you're an MSP, right? So find technology partners, find service partners, companies like Flyform, that are going to help you understand, and they're going to have the experience and the domain knowledge to help lead you on that journey. As a former CTO in the MSP space, I learned that lesson painfully, right? I tried to take a round peg and put it into a square hole, and the big brands convinced me that it would work, wrote off that investment. So 4 things as kind of takeaways to think about.
Yeah, I think they're great. And like yourselves, I think we the reason we picked up traction in the MSP space is because myself and Aaron, the co-founder, personally have worked in MSP background. Also, a lot of our people have, and it's just it is a very unique space. It doesn't operate like any of our other verticals that we're in. So I think that's definitely a key consideration. And I tell you what, this really reminds me of, though, is CPQ feels to me right now like the kind of the CMDB of the 2020s that we need, because when CMDB, and I don't know if you know much about the CMDB implementations, but they notoriously fail, and people spend a load on them. They in the old, maybe the last 5-10 years, they fail, they cost too much, they overrun, they don't produce the outputs that they were expected. And we give this actual same advice that you're giving now to CMDB implementations now. It's not big bang anymore, guys. We don't go in and say we're going to get this all singing unicorn CMDB that'll do everything on day one. So what does day one look like? Like going to Daniel's point earlier, they'll have a big vision. So this is still the vision over here, but day one looks like this. Here's your roadmap. And also, as you say, it's the underlying, we talk about this a lot, the underlying processes. So if you put a CMDB in and you don't have a config process underneath it to, okay, when we make a change, how does the CMDB get updated? Then the CMDB is no good on day 2, and you've wasted all that money. So very, very similar process. And going to the Rome point, what we used to tell people was Rome wasn't built in a day, but they did lay a brick every day. And the point we were making there was, you've got to be in every single day, putting that brick down and building that up and building that platform. So yeah, I think it's a nice fit, and it's a good space. So great. So guys, that's a really good conversation. Thank you. Where can people get in touch with you at Service Path, and how and why should they do that?
Go ahead, Mike.
You go on, Daniel. You're much better at that part than me.
Our website, we have a great form, but I think, one of the things we'd love to offer, we are a big believer in customer fit. So we will tell someone if they're not a good fit for us, and we'll point them in the direction of a vendor who can help. I love the fact that we're working with Flyform, because we can now help combine different worlds, especially with a vision that our customers have asked us to begin focusing on. So, we would be open to helping anyone have an exploratory discussion that's, as agnostic as possible to just help them make the right decisions.
Great. Yeah, and I think same for us, and that's where I think we can bring in that benefit of being an independent partner. We can look at customers' requirements and say, yeah, Service Path's a great fit here, or it's not, but let's get around the table and talk about what they're seeing, where their pain points are, and what they're going through, and see what that looks like. So brilliant.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, referenceable customers are everything to us. We're not like our competitors. Customers are like, yeah. Our company's been built on customer success, and inheriting the failures of others and making them successful.
Great. Same. Brilliant. Well, great, guys. Really great to speak with you today. Thanks very much for your time, and have a great rest of your day.
Cheers.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.